you can tell who the experts are, because they wouldn't allow me to take my sandals off. But experts get bare feet. Hello. Really lovely to see you, although I can really only see the first row here because of these theatre lights. But I know you're out there. I can see vague faces of shapes of things that I recognise. Welcome tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. We're here at the Merlin Theatre in Frome for a conversation brought to you by the Psychedelic Society and produced by Angelfish Films. Psychedelics and the Web of Life, Insights from Psychedelic Research on Connectedness. I can't think of a more timely conversation than the one we're going to have this evening for lots of reasons. It's a conversation about the state of our nation and probably the state of ourselves as we all navigate an epidemic with far deeper existential implications than the COVID one we've just experienced before that. This new epidemic is one of disconnection, not only from the natural world, one of the key topics we're going to talk about today, but also of our political leaders, trusted institutions, and with the seemingly breathtakingly fast advances in artificial intelligence over the last year, perhaps also a disconnection from the notion of what it means to be human, to be us. Is it any wonder the Collins Dictionary word of last year was permacrisis? So it's within this backdrop of change and anxiety that our discussion tonight will focus on how psychedelics and nature-rich therapy might help people to connect at a deeper level with themselves, their natural environment, and each other. I talked about timeliness. So 2 months ago, in April, we saw some anniversaries that are very pertinent to this evening. Lots of you probably know this. So the Scottish-American environmentalist John Muir was born in April 1838. Muir has been described as one of the patron saints of 20th century environmental activity, and his work inspired generations of environmentalists. And Rachel Carson died in April 1964. She was the writer of the book Silent Spring, which for the first time highlighted the environmental harm caused by the indiscriminate use of pesticides. And that book swayed American public opinion to such an extent that it led to a reversal in US agricultural policy, banning DDT for agricultural use, and an environmental movement that led to the creation of the US Environmental Protection Agency. But, and here's the epilogue, part of the reason we're here today, despite Muir's work and Carson's work and the work of countless others, according to the World Wildlife Fund, over 2/3 of our planet's wildlife populations have been lost since 1970. April, of course, marked an important anniversary for the other topic we'll be intersecting with tonight. 80 years ago, on April 19th, 1943, a Swiss chemist called Albert Hofmann, bless him, deliberately ingested 250 micrograms of his newly discovered substance, which he called LSD. Today, there are documentaries about psychedelics on Radio 4, countless long-read stories in the broadsheets, and even artificial intelligence has hallucinations, the term given to made-up facts that ChatGPT generates as part of its intelligent prediction. What can psychedelics teach us about coming back to connectedness, to feel part of a web of life full of beauty or reciprocity, I can never say that word, reciprocity, thank you, and belonging? What are the ways in which they can support a much required change in our relationship with nature? And is the term itself, psychedelics, perhaps too broad to be helpful? Here with us to discuss these topics is a dream team of panelists. Dr. Ros Watts, to my left, is a clinical psychologist. Her work as the clinical lead for Imperial College London's psilocybin trial made her one of the most prominent voices in the field of psychedelic research. She's been named one of the 50 most influential people in psychedelics, as well as one of the top 16 women shaping the future of psychedelics. What sets Ros apart is her focus on integration, harm reduction, and inclusion in the psychedelic space. She builds tools and structures to foster connectedness after psychedelic experiences, finding inspiration from their design from nature, the most recent of which is the integration community she's created, ACER Integration, which helps people connect more deeply to the self, others, and nature. She also gives her name to the Watts Connectedness Scale, which seeks to measure a sense of connectedness to self, others, and the world. Dr. Sam Gandy is a globally recognized ecologist, writer, and speaker, formerly a scientific assistant to the director of the Barclay Foundation, a UK-based think tank and NGO dedicated to global drug policy reform and initiating scientific research into psychoactive substances. He now works as a collaborator with the Centre for Psychedelic Research at Imperial College London, with an interest in the capacity of psychedelics to influence our connection to nature. Sam has had a lifelong interest in nature, wildlife, and the outdoors, coupled with experience of conducting biological fieldwork in a range of environments, including the UK, Kefalonia, Almeria, the Peruvian Amazon, central Vietnam, Texas, and southern Ethiopia. He's an innovation team leader with EcoSolis. Did I say that right? Fantastic. And they're committed to rewilding 50% of the planet by 2050. He's also, this is one of my favourite things here, he was also a comms advisor for the Scottish Wild Beaver Group, a charity set up to protect Scotland's reintroduced Eurasian beaver population, as if we didn't like him enough. Sam is a contributor to numerous books and a much in-demand speaker at conferences and festivals, and I'm going to say some brilliant podcasts, because it was super fun doing some research on this and listening to you at length. And then finally, Isla Macleod, a therapist and author with a multidisciplinary experience in psychedelic research, mental health, and ecology. She's been exploring indigenous traditions, ceremony, ritual, and story since childhood, and throughout her adult life with studies of history, photography, and shamanism. Today, she's the creator of Ceremonies, dedicated to restoring the sacred and inspiring a loving, reciprocal relationship with the natural world. I said it right that time. All of which she writes about beautifully in her book, Rituals for Life, which again, as part of my research, it was a real pleasure to find out and read about this and find out a bit more about you and your work. Rituals for Life, a guide to creating meaningful rituals inspired by nature, and we're talking a bit about that later on. She is driven by her wish to inspire a remembrance of what is sacred in our lives and guide people back home to the natural world. What guides all her work is thinking about how we as humans can cultivate an intimate, meaningful, reciprocal relationship with the web of life. Her website confirms her as an avid lover of moss, mushrooms, trees, wild swimming, and moonlight, some of my favourite things too. She lives in the Vales of Somerset, where she states she can be found exploring the old roots of Selwood Forest, singing to springs, visiting old trees, and tending to the invisible realms. Froome, please welcome your panel for this evening. So it's great to have you all here tonight in Froome, to give its original name, the town of Froome Selwood, which denotes its location in the ancient Selwood Forest, as you all know, but I found out as part of my research. Thank you. My name is Arif Haq. I'll be the moderator for this evening. I should say, when it comes to the topics we'll be discussing today, I'm a complete neophyte. I'm very much in learning mode. You're about to find out how much of a layperson I am. Certainly when compared to the people up here with me. And actually, I know certainly compared to lots of people in the audience as well. But also to many of you in the audience, I'm guessing a bit like me, which is to say, we know a bit, we've experienced a bit maybe, but we're interested in finding out more. We are going to have a great discussion. It's going to be divided up in two big sections. We're going to have for about an hour, up till about 8:20 or so, to listen to each of our panelists before we open up the floor for your questions for another hour after that. If you're entirely new to this topic or a wise and seasoned hand at this topic, this evening's about all of us here. No question is too dumb or stupid, as you're about to find out. Well, some very dumb, stupid questions here. By the same token, if you have a very specific question that really is rooted in some deep knowledge, that's okay too. I might just ask you to explain a little bit more about what you're talking about for everyone else as we go along, and for me. We will finish at about 9:20. After that, it's not over. Bar's open till about 10:45, I think that's right. And we've got some snacks as well being served. And also, each of these three will be set up in different locations in the theatre. So if you'd like to ask some more intimate one-to-one questions, small groups questions, they'll be around, over a drink or some snacks, okay, after the session is over. But this evening is not about me. It's not about these panellists. It's not even about you. It's about us together here in this space. We wanted, in a spirit of show and don't tell, to try and not only think about the topic of connectedness with our brains, but maybe perhaps feel it in our hearts too. So Isla has brilliantly offered to lead a very short moment of ceremony to gather people into this space before we all jump into the discussion later.
So we wanted to give you a little experience of how it is to be a part of this web of life, because so often we don't feel a part of it. And this stone holds the key. So if you will, close your eyes for a few minutes, and I'm going to guide you on a little journey, inviting you to take 3 nice, deep, expansive breaths, filling up your chest, opening your heart. And as you exhale, just softening your body, arriving here, fully present. And another nice deep breath. Michael, good day. And one more full-bodied breath. As we breathe, we are dancing, communing, conversing with one another in the silence. We are in conversation with these wise-rooted ones, the trees who offer themselves so generously, and the waters as they allow us to be, to breathe. Now tuning in to your heartbeat. Feeling that rhythm, that pulse of life, the flow of water in your blood. Feeling your heart within this vessel of your body of earth. How it feels to sit upon a chair, to be in contact with this seat, your feet on the floor. And imagining from your feet that you grow roots that pierce down through the floor, through the concrete, piercing through the topsoil, where there they spread out wide, stretching and mingling with the roots of the trees, the plants, and the webs of mycelium weaving us all together. Sense the seeds that dwell in the darkness, waiting for the right conditions to crack open and emerge. Surrounded by all the vegetation that has composted, all those beings that have died, have given themselves back to earth, regenerated, transformed to bring forth new life. And as your roots go down deeper still, they meet with the waters that flow beneath the ground, receiving that vital nourishment, reminding us of the way to flow as water, how to cycle round and round from death to rebirth to life, as the waters shift from spring to stream to river to sea to cloud to rain and back down again as your tears. Feeling the flow of this water within your bodies, connecting you with all life, with all the memory within water, transmitted through time. And your roots go down deeper through rock and stone, all the way down until they meet with the molten lava of this beautiful earth. And there they can drink up some of this vital fire energy. This energy that brings the warmth to your bodies, stokes your longing, with the light that guides you in your waking life. And now if you wish to take one nice big activating breath and wiggle your body a little as you come back to the space.
Thank you. That was really lovely. Okay, let's start with the basics here. What I'm keen to set us off on is each of you explain, so the title, I read it out loud, one of the first lines I said. What does it mean? Those words, the web of life, connectedness. Tell us your stories, your approach, and based on your interpretation of those words and how they're connected, if they are connected, each of you. Ros, we start with you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Isla, for that. That was really beautiful. Thank you to my stone. So connectedness became, I realized when I was working in the Imperial Psilocybin for Depression trials that connectedness, becoming more connected to ourselves, each other, and the natural world seemed to be, in a way, the key theme of change that people talked about. And it's not something I had studied as a psychologist. It wasn't in any of the textbooks I'd read, what is connectedness? But it seemed to be this very, very important story for people, that their worlds got bigger after a psychedelic experience, that they went from existing in a kind of prison of the mind to the focus, the lens of their world getting bigger and bigger, so connecting to senses, emotions, realizing they have a body, connecting to those feelings, connecting to other people in their lives more, and then also just connecting to all humans, this sense of seeing someone in a shop and kind of connecting to that person on a deeper level, and connecting to nature, connecting to the trees that they saw out of their window. And of course, without further work, that kind of huge sense of connectedness would shrink again in time after weeks or months for most people. But it was still this powerful experience. So based on that research, we developed a scale for measuring that connectedness so that we could really start researching this theme and understanding how it works and how we can bring in new ways to bring back connectedness. As you said, Hack, it's the epidemic of our time, this disconnection that we feel. So what are the different ways we can bring connectedness back? And psychedelic work may be part of that, but I think it's just one small part, and there are so many other ways. And in a way that the idea of connecting to our senses and our bodies and other people that we know and other people globally and nature, trees, animals, and realizing that everything is interconnected, it just in that way of understanding it, it gives us all these invitations to what we can actually do to bring a sense of connectedness into our days. So I think, connectedness has now become for me the thing that I most want to focus on. And it started off with the Imperial trials, and then it led to the development of an integration program. But also, it's something that I've been really feeling recently, the call for connectedness in local communities. And that's one of the things I'm really excited about. This amazing place, because it's I first heard about Frome as a town of connectedness and amazing community initiatives. So I think that Frome is quite a psychedelic town already because of its appreciation for connectedness.
That's probably really fair, isn't it? I mean, it's my personal experience, and I know others here who've moved to Frome recently. I've moved here explicitly to find a deeper sense of connectedness with a community, with nature. It seems to be one of the main reasons that lots of people have moved here recently. What about this this term, web of life? What does that mean for you?
It brings an embodied response for me, because I had no idea that I was part of a web of life until a few years ago.
You're alive, aren't you? So what did you think it was? It was another thing.
I just, like many people, I think I saw nature as an external thing. So one of the participants in our trial said, that he saw nature. He used to see nature as a thing, like a TV or a painting, and then suddenly he realized he was nature. And I think for many people, nature is something that you can, you can go to the cinema or you can go for a walk. It's a thing that you do. And because it's usually raining in this country, it's something that's not even that appealing. For a lot of people, it's like, oh, let's go to the cinema instead.
Too much nature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when I had the first visceral experience of, oh, right, okay, then it changed the way I saw nature, because suddenly the earth, like when it rains and it's muddy, that goes from being something that's just going to make your shoes dirty to something that you can feel the vibration of life. You can feel that it's the stuff of life. It's what we're made of. And it suddenly became therapeutic, inherently therapeutic. And I could understand how I am nature. I have seasons within me, and I have, I can regenerate my own inner soil, in the same way that we look at depleted landscapes outside. We have depleted landscapes inside. And I started to understand how I am part of a web, and when I understand myself as part of that web, I am regenerated, and I am resourced and given energy by that sense of belonging, and that I'm held by something much bigger than me and purpose to want to protect it. And so I think, Sam has done lots of work on this as well, but we've written some papers together about this kind of thing. The incredible, incredible value for human beings to connect with nature and understand that we are nature, the huge kind of mental health benefits that we get from that. And it's this amazing resource. It's free. It's there, So I think, I really hope that more and more people are waking up to the sense that we are part of this incredible web, and the joy that can come from that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ros, for that kick-off. Let's go to Sam, actually. Same question. Connectedness, web of life. Tell us your story, why you're here, your approach, and how it has been altered or affected by those two words and what they mean to you.
Thank you. Yeah. So I've always loved and been fascinated by nature, by anything alive. I've just always been, fascinated by that.
A childhood thing, was it?
Yeah, from a very young age. My mum helped fan the flames of that, because she loves her nature and her birds as well. So I had a kind of supportive upbringing that kind of nurtured that. And I guess as I got older, I kind of funneled that into academia. I ended up doing a PhD in ecology, ecological science and entomology. But it was actually the start of my fairly prolonged, drawn-out undergraduate career. It was a heady little time window when psilocybin mushrooms were legal in London. You could walk onto the high street in Camden and buy fresh tubs of mushrooms. Prior to then, I'd not been particularly interested in substances. Didn't particularly drink, certainly didn't smoke. But I was like, there was some little something that caught my interest. And
Was it the fact it came from nature, perhaps? If you're already passionate about nature?
I don't think it was just that. I think I'd maybe read or heard some stuff, and it had kind of opened a door of curiosity, and I kind of wanted to explore that on my own terms. And my first experience, I'm not particularly proud of it. Me and my good friend Al, we chowed down a tub of fresh mushrooms and got on the underground and went to this nightclub, Fabric, and it was a train wreck of an evening. But it didn't scare me off. It taught me a lesson in humility and respect and set and setting and, all those things. So it wasn't a wasted kind of experience, but that sort of, I guess, propelled me. That just got me really interested. And when I get interested in something, I get really interested in something. I want to know all the different facets of it. So I started reading and attending conferences. I started writing. I started to get to know some of the figures involved, including Ros. Later down the line, I attended this conference breaking convention, and a now friend, occasional collaborator, Dr. David Luke, gave a talk as part of this symposium on how psychedelics can potentially ignite ecological awareness or concern and facilitate connection to nature, change people's relationships with nature. And I wasn't aware of any work being done at the intersection of ecology nature and psychedelics until that time, and I think there wasn't really much work being done until David was doing that. So I was like, okay, this is a really interesting. I want to be at the intersection of these two Venn diagrams, and that was sort of, I guess, my partial kind of on-ramp, I guess. But just to bring it back, I guess, to this idea of a web of life, and Ros was saying she feels it in an embodied way. And I do, but I also acknowledge it or sort of think about it in a kind of more detached intellectual way, in a sense, because ecology, the science of ecology, is the science of the interconnectivity and interdependence of living systems. So it's sort of a detached scientific understanding of the web of life, if you will. And, you know, I'm like well, it's good science. I do think that scientific knowledge can be a pathway to deeper awe and wonder, which is partly why I do it. But it's not the be-all and end-all, and it does have its limits. And the thing about psychedelics, and not necessarily just psychedelics, but one of their capabilities, I think, that makes them, I think, quite important and interesting is they can facilitate an experiential, felt experience of being part of the web of life. It moves past a detached, objective kind of understanding to something you feel directly with your core being. So they can provide a different pathway of knowledge, or rather knowing, of that being part of a larger interconnected web. And I think that's what makes them valuable. I think as well, the experiential, emotional aspect of that, you're probably more likely to change minds and mindsets and human behavior through direct experience and emotions than you are through facts and evidence, I think.
As we all know in recent years, right? So actually feeling it, feeling part of nature rather than just theorising about the academic scientific notion of it. Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Isla, those words, connectedness, web of life. Tell us about why you're here, what you mean, what you think of those two terms and how they're connected.
I think I just want to speak a little bit to semantics.
Yeah, great.
So the web of life is a metaphor, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that it's a metaphor because we can't rationally understand it sometimes, that there's a lot of language that gets in the way of our connection with nature. So the way that our mind works is that we abstract ourselves from nature, we identify things, we label them, and in doing so, we are separating ourselves from them. And in some way, that also gives us power over them. So it's useful, we need language to communicate, but I think just to speak to that in this, I've been working a lot at how to reclaim language so that it's not perpetuating separation. It's really difficult in my book to sort of enable that referencing of nature and the natural world without saying it, or not wanting it to be gendered. So it's something that I think we could all explore, and collectively I think it's a really juicy conversation to have. But yes, the web of life is for me a metaphor of seeing the world as a multifaceted and multidimensional web of relationships, which reveal the way that we are connected and interdependent with all life, seen and unseen. And I think for me, I came to experience that in an embodied way through really seeking connection from a place of deep disconnection, and starting from quite young, from being at a boarding school very young, I carried with me that story of feeling apart and alone and disempowered and really not knowing how to relate with the natural world, the spiritual world, or myself. So I found from very young I was seeking, like, what is the meaning of this? Why are we here? I was always, deep in questioning these such things, and got very interested in substances that helped me access altered states and music. I got very into drum and bass and jungle, having a bit of a revival of that at the moment. And what that revealed, like recently listening to it, was what it enabled me at that time was to experience a sense of dissolution to some extent of my separateness, to be able to be in communion with the music, with the others in the space. I wouldn't have been able to identify that at the time, but I can see that they were all sort of seeds along the way of leading me towards a more healthy approach, which led me back round to ceremony and ritual as a path of recognizing the ways that we are connected and can call in and bring forth that support of the natural world, the spiritual world, beings that have passed, our ancestors, that we are able to communicate and be in right relationship with and be in harmony with the web of life when we bring it into our conscious awareness, even if we don't feel it all the time, which, you know, in our day-to-day life, it's hard to feel that level of connection constantly. We hold that paradox as humans, that we are ultimately alone, that we are born from our mother's womb and we are cut, the cord is cut and we become separate on some level, and we carry that trauma. So I think we all carry that wound of separation and we die alone. But within all that, we have this whole microcosm of the whole that we are completely a part of. So that fascinates me, and to support people in having experiences of that, I find that ceremony and ritual and other ways of connecting with the natural world through sensory embodiment practices, through pilgrimage, through foraging and crafting. But ceremony has just been such a revelation for me of also restoring a connection with the sacred, which was really missing for me in our culture. And I had some very interesting experiences in countries growing up, such as Nigeria and Japan, that fed my longing for such like ritual and costumes and all sorts of wonderful things, drumming and community, being in community and honouring together this gift of life really spoke to me. And I think the lack of that growing up in my adolescence led me to try and find it in other ways. And ultimately it led me to a bit of a sort of breakdown at a time of depression. But through that I found meditation and spent some time living in retreat and really deepening that practice. But then the woods called and I went to be an apprentice to the natural world. And in that time, these experiences of being completely woven with nature, woven with love, became more readily accessible because I had stepped away from a lot of society and the norms, and I realized it's not always easy to find that sort of space and silence and solitude, but there are little keys that we can, I'm sure we will be talking about tonight, to be able to support each other in that remembering and reclamation, to stretch that muscle, really, of remembering that we are all together on this wild journey of life.
Really just fascinating and quite different answers, actually, nuanced to all of them. I'll just pick up what two of you said, actually. I mean, Sam telling us one of his brilliant acid stories. We could do mushroom stories. I've got a few as well. That'd be a good game, wouldn't it? We're not going to do that. But actually, the serious point is, we've talked about how lots of us got into psychedelics of our lives, maybe when we were quite young, through what we would call like social settings. My version of yours was 97, Q Club, Groove Rider, right? And you know, having a very good time. And I will use the word profound, at the time, a deeply profound experience with people I loved, didn't know that well, maybe, you know, 6 or 7 months, but deeply, deeply profound, and stays with me even now, driven, supported, and aided and abetted by things we're all doing that evening. Am I naive or unsophisticated to call that profound? Sometimes, is there things we can learn from what we would call, I don't want to use the word recreational, but sometimes, you know, people can be quite sniffy, but there's the scientific thing, therapeutic, and also the lifestyle, social thing. I happen to think this is as profound as the other one for me personally. Is that naive of me, and am I using the word profound in the sort of the wrong way? What do you think, Sam?
I don't think you're necessarily being naive. I mean, I'll be interested to hear kind of obviously Ros's take.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I know what you mean about the term recreational, that it kind of potentially diminishes it as something frivolous and without meaning, and like that's, I mean, scientifically we term usage like that naturalistic usage, so usage in the wild, not non-clinical space, and that can cover quite a wide spectrum.
Sometimes very wild, yes.
I mean, one of my collaborators, researcher Matthias Forsman, he's done some interesting work on people using psychedelics in the wild, so at music festivals. And obviously, you know, if we've got like our responsible scientist hat on, you've got to acknowledge that there is the unpredictability and the uncontrolled nature of those environments that obviously is more inherent risk. Yeah. You know, with clinical application of psychedelics, there's a lot of thought and energy goes into preparing people for those experiences and supporting them during and then after. And that's all very important. But something that kind of came to light in some of his research, looking at psychedelic use and other drugs at music festivals over a number of years in the US, was that people did have deeply transformative experiences in those settings that had lasting positive impact. They had deep experiences of social connectedness, as you were describing. You know, that's the kind of the sciencey way we'd term that, connecting with others. And it seems like obviously in a clinical setting with therapists, you know, there's energies and sort of care is put into developing that bond of trust between therapist and the person having that session. And that's very important, because that feeling of trust and security allows you to let go into the experience, surrender, and accept what is coming, good or bad. And that's a very important determinant of positive outcomes. But that therapist, and obviously I don't want to invade on Ros's turf too much, but that therapist kind of client bond is kind of almost piggybacking familial kind of bonds. And it seems in the recreational setting, friends and loved ones are almost kind of stepping into the niche almost of the therapist in some sense. So yeah, no, I feel like it would be a little bit of a disservice to kind of dismiss the potential value of like psychedelic use in the wild while also acknowledging the greater potential for risk.
Thanks, Sam. Ros, then, go on then. Tell us what you think about it, because it's quite a topic that...
I think I just agree with what Sam said. I mean, we've had 5 decades of training we've had 5 decades of individualism, rampant individualism. And if you look at where it has taken us, then we need a movement towards connection. And we need a movement towards those kind of those moments that you describe when you're, whether it's in a nightclub or a festival, wherever you are, and you feel that sense of opening up, your sense of self widening to encompass those around you, the trees around you. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And so I think when people have that profound experience, that's part of the revolution that we need. But at the same time, you know, I think psychedelic experiences, when you look at the kind of media response at the moment of there was the pendulum swing from, obviously in the 60s, they were really demonized and, you know, talked about as they were going to fry your brain. And then we've seen this swing the other way. And now they're kind of idealized and talked about as giving a brain reset. And so those kind of headlines do make me quite nervous, because I think it tells a story that doesn't reflect the story that I have experienced people going through. And it also doesn't really reflect the visceral power of these initiations. And that I think there's an invitation that if we can say, as a community, as a people, wow, this is a powerful tool, what is the best way? Like, if we really think about how would we like to ground this tool with community, with support, with each other, how would we like for each of us to be initiated? Or maybe not everybody, but for those for whom it's safe to be. how would we like that initiation to happen, rather than being at a Glastonbury, which, you know, might be transformative for some, but for some could be so overwhelming and too much stimulation and not enough support. Or in a clinical trial, which might be great for some people, but for other people wouldn't reflect what they would need. So I think there's a real moment to really think about how, given the power of psychedelics, how can we recognize this impetus that so many of us have to explore those altered states of consciousness, and bring about accessibility to those methods, these ancient methods, at a time when we really need that connectedness and we need that revolution, but how to do it in a way that's grounded in community and safe, and acknowledging of the intensity that for some people is too much, you know, and you might want to build up very gradually. So, yeah, but basically the same as what Sam said. I think it's the same message.
And this idea of set and setting, which at the moment you start looking into this, set and setting, which is what, mindset and setting, is it environment? Tell us a bit more about that and the importance of that, certainly in clinical trials. And there was a huge overlap in having a positive or a not negative experience by thinking about those two as well out of the clinical environment, I assume.
Well, so with Isla's work, and I'd love to hear about, you know, your ideas about set and setting and the importance of ceremony and ritual and beauty. And I mean, a lot of the clinical trial work has borrowed from these ceremonial, from the ceremonial container. So psilocybin was synthesized by Albert Hoffman, same guy that did LSD.
Good old Albert.
Very busy guy. And he was given mushrooms by a medicine woman, a curandera, Maria Sabina, from the Mazatec tradition. And actually quite a lot of the ingredients in the clinical trial setting have come from those indigenous ways. So I think, and we don't always acknowledge that actually, but yeah, the ceremonial container is so important. But I'd love to hear more what you think, Isla, about set and setting.
Yeah, I'm also wanted to just speak to the experiences that you described as profound. I think for me, those experiences that I had were life-changing because they revealed to me a whole other way of seeing through, you know, education and what the popular culture is speaking to. We're not given access to those realms. And so it just completely shifted my perception that there was a whole other way of looking at life. And it might be that without the guides and certainly the integration, it could have been a wobbly time. But for me personally, it was really profound and moved me, I think, towards the work that I do now. The ceremonial process that I feel is within any ritual that works with the time of a threshold. And I like to think that these kind of experiences are a threshold. They are an experience of dying to an old way of being. So seeing it as a rite of passage, which has the 3 stages whereby you're sort of leaving the familiar, you're sort of traditionally you would have left the tribe, left the village to go out on your own. And you're the only one that can actually make that voyage with psychedelics. You might have the guide, but you are ultimately meeting yourself on your own. And that space is the sort of liminal space, the cocoon, whereby we are transformed. And then returning and being hopefully welcomed back, celebrated, you know, by the village, by your guide, is without doubt a very supportive and holistic way to approach this work, but all ceremony, to know that we have the whole community that can also bear witness to us and reflect back those changes that they've seen us cross that threshold. Without that, it can feel very lonely, and I didn't feel I had a lot of those guides or elders, but I did have the trees, and for me the trees have been witness to all my most significant rites of passages, and the stones, and it's sometimes I think there is something valuable, there is definitely something valuable about humans witnessing and being able to recognize that you're part of this community. But for me, for whatever reason, it was easier to relate with them and to feel like I was held on a much deeper level than I ever felt held by humans, sadly. So I didn't feel I needed a guide or needed that space to be held by another human. But without doubt, there are those that I think do, and also the space within that comes about with being in a ceremony with another also enables that kind of relation, that kind of exchange and harmonizing and balancing to occur, which I think doesn't happen to the same extent if you're going, for instance, to have an experience when you're not having the intention of ceremony. Intention, that's the other piece to speak to. We can go and have a great night out, but if we haven't maybe gone into it with this recognition of what is it that I'm really longing for in this moment, what is it that I'm asking to be revealed to me, or what I love turning things on its head is like, what are the mushrooms asking of us? Not what I want from them, but what is it that they're asking of us at this time? To be really present to this idea of us as vessels, and with that cultivating the trust that there is a process that we're going through which will, on some level, will be undone, like that we are going to be meeting our death in many ways throughout our life, and to experience that and to grow the sort of the capacity to hold ourselves with as much compassion and kindness and curiosity of what it is to die to ourselves, to then be able to really meet that final threshold and initiation of death in a good way and become a good elder, an ancestor, is for me a large part of making these kinds of journeys of rites of passage is learning how to cultivate a good relationship with death. And I think that's a big part of speaking to the disconnection, is that we're not looking at a lot of places or subject matters because they're uncomfortable and we don't like to go there. So actually, let's just not feel or speak about those things. So it becomes increasingly like we're feeling all these fears on our own and not being able to have these conversations. And that's another invaluable thing about a guide, is that you have that ability to speak to and share your experience, to have those reflections offered back. So, yeah, I think there's benefits of both. It depends on the individual.
And this is what you mean. So when I was reading about you, Isla, this term, is it companion at the thresholds? Came up. This is exactly what you're talking about, the thresholds. And there are different thresholds in different places. If that's a role that you play for others at times, do you have, who does it for you? Or do you do it now, today? Or do you need it? Can you be your own companion at the thresholds?
Well, as I said, I've called in a lot of other beings, but they're not human.
Yes.
So Merlin, we invited in today, obviously. And I've had the yew tree as my elder for a long time that I've called in, and different tree spirits will come in and be with me. Different archetypal energies often, depending on the type of ceremony of what you're wanting to invoke. It can be really playful, and it's, I think, a really vital thing. We were talking about it earlier, Ros, the power of the imagination. So again, like really bringing online all this potential of seeing the more than human world and seeing what we might perceive as inanimate as alive. So things that I know in the past I might have struggled to relate with, what concrete or my phone. Actually recognizing within that the elements of the natural world, that actually our phones are made entirely of elements and ultimately are stone. And all these different mediums of communication, computers, are based on all these natural beings. So, and also I think being in my car the other day, like I really see my car as a steed, this companion that takes me on journeys, that I'm in this relationship with, and my home is very much alive to me, my hearth. So it's restoring that way of seeing that is enchanting in a way. It's sort of magical that we have all these potential relationships that we can cultivate beyond the human that can really enliven our experience of life and belonging.
So I find it fascinating when you're talking about the phone and the car and things like that. So that word, technology, I guess everything around us is technology, including, as I said earlier, LSD. But often there is a tension or a perceived zero sum between nature and technology. I was reading something recently about, well, we might have heard Apple have just brought out this incredible new, innovation in terms of in VR. So when it comes out, it's going to be amazing. And the ability for virtual reality, as one example, to extend or augment the psychedelic experience seems like an area that people are very interested in, can take you to places, just like a great film can or a piece of music, can take you to places that you are not physically, instantly often. and there is ability to self-induce a hallucination. Often, we're kind of inducing our own hallucinations all the time. Some of them great, some of them not so great. How helpful has technology been when you're considering about the work that you've done in the past, actually both of you, in technology and specifically the ways that we can, I'm really interested in like video games where movies are moving towards experiential things that make us feel like we're in the worlds. Is that something that you've looked at in the past, and where might it be going?
Well, so your connection with trees. Sorry, this sounds like it's a very random tangent, but I'm coming back to technology. I love a random tangent.
Go for it.
Well, trees are amazing technology as well. The way the roots interconnect underground, they are, yeah. The Wood Wide Web, the original. When you talk about your connection with trees, I had a similar experience, and coming out of the clinical trial work and feeling, I was living in London, feeling quite disconnected from everything, very much using technology all the time. Moving to the countryside, actually, to a beautiful place called Farndon Grange, and having a very profound experience with a field maple tree, and recognizing the power and the depth of the tree as a metaphor for connectedness and for healing and wisdom and strength and grounding and everything, transmuting lead to gold and the mud to sap and growth. And well, it just, we could talk about how therapeutic trees are forever, but or how, when you connect with the tree, you can feel that. But so I took that embodied connection with tree, which was the first time I really connected to nature properly, and converted it into a 12-month integration program for people after psychedelic experiences, where every month we follow a different tree. And the reason I'm saying all this is because it's online. So it's an online community. At the beginning of the month, we do a tree journey, which is a guided imagery journey, all on our screens. And we have sharing circles all on our screens. And at first I was like, is this not a massive paradox that we're doing this work about connecting to nature on screens? But actually the idea is that we are connecting with each other all over the world and inspiring each other and deepening our process and connecting to ourselves and each other in nature. And then the idea is that when people complete the cycle, then they can be agents of connectedness in their own local ecosystems. So it can start off with technology and then go out into the natural world. And I feel like if we're going to be doing radical work in our communities to bring our communities together and make them places of healing and togetherness and belonging and activism and all those other things we need to do, then having some kind of online networks as kind of mentoring and supporting each other over the world, in different places of the world, can be really important. So I see communities of purpose and communities of place. Communities of purpose often being online, and communities of place often being local, as working really, really well together and both being, reciprocally beneficial.
But it's really, you need that first phase where you just got talking, just to scale it, just to get, you can all do that quickly and then create the ambassadors, if you like, for them to go in their local communities. That's really interesting. And again, Sam, do you have the same thing about the relationship with technology? And as a nature lover and ecologist, what do you think about looking at trees on screens?
So yeah, it's complex. If we zoom out and look at sort of some of the reasons for an erosion or of people's connection to relationships with nature, technology is definitely playing a role in that. It's one of the most recent waves of disconnect, I would say. And this is including things like, computer, video games, smartphone usage, internet usage, and this is particularly fanning the flames of disconnect in the young, worryingly. And there's other things in the mix as well. It'd be unfair to just fully peg it with technology, but it's definitely playing a role. But technology is not bad inherently. It's all about how it's used and the intent. And for good or ill, technology isn't going anywhere. It's part of our lives now. We can try and disconnect if we want, but it's gonna not be so easy, I think.
We also show no signs of wanting to disconnect.
Yeah. Well, and also, and Ros was kind of alluding to, trees being an expression of organic technology, but, I sometimes refer to the internet as the mycelial interwebs. I mean, there's a lot of kind of analogous stuff with some of our technology and how different aspects of nature kind of operate. But I think technology can play a positive role as well. There's been a few studies using apps that sort of help people identify different species and different things around them. And I've just started reading this book by this guy, Professor Miles Richardson, and he heads the Nature Connectedness Research Group at Derby Uni, and he's kind of quite a heavyweight figure in the field. And it's been really interesting seeing his journey, because he wasn't always what he would consider a nature-connected person. You know, he kind of had that perspective of nature as being good, but kind of something other and separate that he would enjoy visiting, but as a kind of relatively passive, superficial observer. You know, he had a well-manicured garden, occasionally sprayed pesticides and stuff, and then he actually, he used some kind of app on his phone, and he started going for early morning walks, and he started writing a little bit of poetry just on this app on his phone and writing a few notes, and something shifted deeply with his relationship with nature, and that in turn, which I thought was really interesting, completely affected his external environment as well. He stopped using pesticides. He stopped worrying about having a manicured garden. He let wild nature and wild plants, quote unquote weeds, live where they wanted to. So it was really kind of interesting to see the technology in that case was kind of a helpful leverage that shifted his relationship. So yeah, I feel like we need to be careful about viewing technology in a good or bad, black or white way, because it's complex and multifaceted.
You mentioned a couple of things, but one of them is the talk of the town at the Royal Chelsea Flower Show. Not that I went there, but I read about it. Was weeds. You know, the plants formerly known as weeds. People letting their lawns overgrow. People understanding that our understanding of what we call nature is actually hedgerows and cultivated agriculture, and actually real nature is probably the forest that was there before. How do we balance our need to conquer and use and extract from nature with our need also to develop and grow? Now, I use that word grow as people, but grow economically, politically. None of our politicians mainstream are talking, they're literally all saying growth, growth, and then they're saying it 5 times. How do we balance those two? Is there any hope? At the moment, it feels like we're locked in this kind of inertial Mephisto Watts going round and round of the same old thing, and everyone's just sleepwalking their way into it. Before we go to audience questions, give us, the 3 of you, some moments of hope, things what you're looking forward to, things that we can take into the next few years, decades, and maybe our children's lives with positivity from your perspective. What about you, Isla, first?
Well, I like the metaphors, and I like seeds, and I do know that within us are these seeds of potential, and this stone you're holding might be seen as a symbol of that there is within us a huge amount that we're not making use of. And even just in terms of our limited sense of our perception, we only see, I think, 0.0001% of the spectrum of light, and the same of sound. That there is so much more that we can bring online once we are able to access more expanded states of consciousness in a grounded way, being these human expressions of nature, of beings that are inherently sacred. That there's something, I feel, rising, and it's coming up from the roots. It's also coming from the sun. It feels like there is a great turning, and that we are here at this time as midwives of the birth of this new earth, that we chose to be here at this time. It comes with great responsibility, and it's going to be a lot of grief and a lot of chaos and endings before we're able to welcome the new. But I realize, I feel it in my body, this real sense of the possibility of human beings remembering all that we are, why we came here, and how we can come into sweet harmony and just be vessels of love, ultimately.
Thanks, absolutely lovely. Have a think about your questions, by the way. Sam, give us some things from your line of work, from your point of view, of reasons, things we should look forward to for it to be positive.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll just maybe start by paraphrasing like the UK is considered one of the most nature disconnected parts of Europe and other kind of like Western English speaking nations. And not only that, but worse than that, we're one of the most nature depleted parts of the world in terms of the amount of biodiversity, the amount of wildlife we've lost.
But hang on, our dog ownership is off the scale in the UK, right? We all have pets. We love our pets. What do you mean we're disconnected from nature? That we allow them into our homes?
Yeah, no, I mean, no, having pets and dogs, particularly dogs, because they get you outside and stuff and engaged, that can potentially be a pathway to greater connection. But not necessarily. You can still have quite a passive, sort of detached relationship with nature if you're walking your dog. And I'll say, like, despite that rather grave preamble I just put out there, I guess in my own line of work, working in kind of nature recovery, eco-restoration, like there is some really good stuff going on in terms of, ecological restoration, biodiversity uplift, habitat creation. There is some very passionate and committed people, brilliant people who really care and want to do what they can. And like there is a groundswell, there is a growing awareness, and things are gaining momentum. Things are happening. I think people are sort of waking up because, you know, like right now, our current operating system as a civilization, the game is rigged against connection. You know, our societal value system is based on materialism, individualism, and anthropocentrism. And all those three values, they are inversely like correlated with connection. So the whole operating system is rigged against us. In our ruthless pursuit of materiality, which has borne us many wonders and amazing fruits. You know, we defeated smallpox, we split the atom, we've gone into space, and we've achieved amazing things. But I think some of us are waking up to now that something's been forgotten or lost, and it's the immaterial aspects of our humanity that are so fundamentally important, connectedness among them. And it's almost like we're having to go through the suffering associated with that disconnect to kind of wake us up to the importance of that. So I think on a broad scale, I'm heartened by what I see through brilliant and committed and passionate humans working hard to do what they can to protect and restore nature in this country and other parts of the world. So there is real reason for hope, and like across the board it can be a bit grim, but there are some wondrous success stories happening. And then I'd say on an individual level, like, you know, like we're all part of nature. You know, like it's not like political leanings or spiritual perspective. It's just a fundamental, inescapable bedrock of being a human on this planet. And that awareness of being part of a larger interconnected web is I would consider a pathway to true flourishing. It's not the only pathway, but it is a pathway. And it's really not that hard to cultivate that. And it all starts with paying attention. Where you put your awareness is important. And just start tuning in to the world around you. And the more you do that, the more it will feed you back and lift you up and enrich your life.
Okay, I've got a question here. So, Terence McKenna, there's a pretty famous quote of Terence McKenna who said, if you can do one thing in the psychedelic space, please bring back a new idea, because we are a species in desperate need of new ideas that we've just heard. Give us a best guess of when we can get our leaders, our political leaders, locked in a room with a bowl full of mushrooms to make some decisions and bring back some new ideas. I mean, it's a serious question. When do we think some of the things we all know about the new ideas, the opportunity for new ideas, may be mainstream to the point at which our leaders see them as genuine aids to their decision making, which affects all of us and everyone around the world? The G20, let's say. Is that the aim? Are we far off that? Should we be aiming for that, Ros?
Well, I love that idea of kind of putting psychedelics in the water of the leaders.
I'm talking about with their permission. I am not talking about do not do that. I'm talking about, look, come on, we've got 4 days, we'll solve it, let's do this.
I think because sometimes psychedelic experiences seem to be able to radically transform the political views of people, sometimes. But I would say more often than not, from what I've seen, they're amplifiers. So they amplify where people are already at, their existing belief system often. So I think that, people will say a lot about Donald Trump and that everyone should give him acid, but actually I would hate to see what would happen to Donald Trump on acid, because I think he'd probably get much worse. So, so I think in a way, rather than expecting our leaders, so the system that we have in this, in our world, it's an industrial dominator society. Individualism, competition is the name of the game. It's how we work. So I think often our leaders have got to those positions through extreme, often psychopathy, even just like some psychopathy, like even just traits. But
just to want to be a leader, I guess, is an element of that.
And the desire for power and all of those kind of things. So I think, and there's often corruption, power corrupts as well. So even if somebody becomes a politician for all the best reasons, if they're given a lot of power, then after a few years they may well, find their ethics, change, because often the ends justify the means and there's lots of complexities at play. So I would say, rather than hoping that our leaders will sit in a room and have a San Pedro ceremony together, which is probably the psychedelic that would be most likely to help, I would imagine. But, okay. I think what I hope for is that as the systems crumble around us, the economics, whichever ones crumble first. I mean, already our National Health Service is kind of, falling apart, and other systems will crumble too. And I don't want to say that lightly, like it's something I'm hoping for, because I think there will be so much suffering when these systems do start to judder and fall apart, and there will be this huge reorganization. But I think part of that reorganization will be that local communities become empowered, and that rather than it being about the decisions of a few leaders, it will become, I hope, the decisions of circles of grandmothers and grandfathers who have not got their own individual, ego drive for power, but have a lot of experience and have kind of done the power game thing, and actually can start to make decisions about their community, thinking about the idea of making decisions for the next 7 generations. So I think there have been some places where it's been incorporated into law. I think in Wales, where decisions are made, they need to think about the views of the next generations, and that's
as a stakeholder, future generations.
Yeah, that they have a voice when policies are made. But we need to. That's going to be the guiding principle now. I think. How does this affect the coming generations in terms of their right to clean air, their right to breathe, their right to live in habitable lands? And so I think those kind of things could come into policy potentially. But I think it's more likely, probably, I imagine, that it'll only happen when the systems break, because those people that have power don't want to let it go, really. And they don't want to, and it's very difficult to stop that juggernaut of corporate capitalism, where it's kind of written into the system of a corporate company that profit is more important than anything else. So I think it's going to be a time of great challenge, and it will be in our local communities that we see a new way of living emerge. And I think psychedelics can be part of that if they're grounded very, very carefully in structures and systems that can house them and ground them safely. But most importantly, we're going to need new ways of managing conflict in our communities. We don't have very good structures at the moment in our society for managing conflict and disruption. And because of the times that are coming, I think we'll see that. And that's up for all of us now to start assessing how can we as communities start to develop and deepen and become more powerful, I think Froome is an amazing example of that. How can we start to prepare for the times of turbulence that are coming and develop trusting networks, reciprocal networks, but also systems and practices around finding peaceful relations between ourselves. So I think we can start that work now, and ritual and ceremony can be part of that. You don't need any psychedelic substances, but to start setting that intention for how can we all work, not wait for our leaders to bring peace, but ourselves to, in each day, in the little things we do, start to have the intention of more peaceful living in harmony with the web of life.
Comes from us, yeah. Okay, I am going to write San Pedro down in my memo to the UN as a suggestion. San Pedro, thank you for that. Okay, okay. So let's get to the real questions. Yes, we've got people hopefully holding mics right now. I can't see if you. Oh yes, hello. I can see you now. Hello. Questions. Who do we have first? If someone got a mic in their hand, basically, if you put your hand up, how it's going to work is that if you put your hand up, someone will give you a mic on your hand, and then I will see that, and then I will ask them. So who's the first person with a mic in their hand? If hello. Hello at the front. Hello. Hello. I'm Amelia. Can you hear me okay? It's not on, I think.
It's on now.
Oh, yes. Hello, Amelia.
Hello.
Lovely
Thank
to see
you.
you.
Really lovely to hear all your stories. Really beautiful, inspiring, heartening. My question, I suppose, I was talking to a Jungian analyst on a beach in Thailand recently who said psychedelics are too fast a doorway. The doorway opens too quick for people, for some people maybe. And I suppose I'm interested in this kind of addiction to peak experiences that we're seeing in the alternative world, in the personal development world, of like ayahuasca retreats all the time, medicine ceremonies all the time. And it was kind of this addiction to these experiences again and again. I suppose, like, I dream of a world where young people would be able to be initiated so thoroughly and deeply that they would move from a kind of patho-adolescent, which is kind of causing all of these problems we're facing, I see, into kind of a generative adult. But how, like, what between you, I'd like love your vision of what kind of community, deep-rooted community initiatory experiences, both for young people and the uninitiated adults. How do we bring that into the mainstream in like a mass way? I'm really curious about that and your ideas and visions for that.
Sam, go on.
No, I'm going to hand it over
Great.
to these ladies.
Good.
Amelia. Yeah, this is something that's very much on my mind and heart, particularly how to bridge into those systems, what would you call them? Those where this sort of work is less familiar. Because as you say, I think there's a lot of people that are sort of caught in this wave, and there's a lot of seeking spiritual connection, and through that having these peak experiences which can somehow validate and I think bring online a lot of these ways of seeing that perhaps we just can't access in the way that we are so disconnected and feeling so apart from ourselves. It creates that connection. But for a lot of people, it's not grounded, it's not held in a safe way. They don't have the guides, the elders, those to sort of help them across those thresholds. So I know that my journey into adulthood was desperately seeking an experience, ultimately of some kind of death experience, a rite of passage, to become an adult in a way that was recognized by my community, that was really saying goodbye to my childhood. And there are other ways that we could bring in certain rites of passage in terms of sort of structure from other cultures. The wilderness rites of passage obviously is one form of that, going on a vision fast with the natural world in solitude, crying for a vision of why am I here, what is my life for, which is incredibly valuable. But I think that to make it readily accessible, there are things which would probably deter certain people. And I think language is also important of how we frame these things. And for me, the way in, besides trees, which are really valuable and I think are a way in, is attuning to the natural rhythms of the cycles. We can all relate to the seasons. We all know that we depend on our food being sown at the spring with a seed, that we harvest it in autumn. So how can we just bring back those simple community celebrations of the Harvest Festival, of Thanksgiving, of being together on the darkest night of Yule at solstice, and being able to share stories and song and celebrate that we have this solidarity together through the darkness. So I think being able to mark with ceremony some of those thresholds of the year, of the seasons, and also the lunar cycle, also that for me was what enabled a rewiring within me of seeing the world not as a linear thing, but it's a regenerative cycle that is constantly going through this process of life and death and rebirth. And as I said earlier, that there's something vital for me about us having some taste of dying and death to come into right relationship with it. So I am curious about how we can remember or create ceremonies where people are tested, that we go through processes that are challenging, that we really meet our strength. We were talking about birth today, weren't we? And what that can do for a woman once they've gone through the process of birthing a child, that we're unstoppable. And to give people experiences like, the sun dance, where they are there for 5, sometimes 10 days with no water, running back and forth to a tree in prayer continually. And that to me is like, what is possible for us humans when we create the spaces for us to explore the way that we can show up more fully, cultivate the resilience, and go through that sort of process of transformation intentionally. So I don't have the answers by any means, but I would love, and I know you do great work in creating that bridge into more corporate environments. Yes, you do. And and I think that it's something that's really topical, of it not just being this kind of niche thing that we, the psychedelic movement can sometimes feel, that actually we really need, like mycelium, to be like from the roots up. How can we get into those systems and structures and create meaningful times of ceremony and being together, whereby we experience the thresholds of life in a more meaningful way?
Is one of the assumptions, and by the way, we might not ask all three for all questions, so we're trying to get around as many as we can. But, although, Ros, you can respond, yes. One of the assumptions, though, in your answer seems to be either that this acceleration, some of this desperate attempt to try and peak experiences to capture those, is potentially because there isn't existing ceremony in people's lives. And actually, if there was, then psychedelics are neither here nor there. You could have more ceremony. Is that fair to say? So it's not necessarily that, but psychedelics are certainly a way of accelerating something that we just don't have at all. So we're trying to maximise the opportunity and the impact of it.
Seeing what we are seeing with the adolescents, it's really clear that they're not having those kinds of containers or threshold moments honouring ceremony, whereby they are being recognised as going through a really significant evolution in their maturing process. And I think that is what leads to so many alternative ways of finding those peak experiences, of exploring and maybe meeting our death in some way, that we're not having the guidance around that. So yeah, we seek it in other ways.
Brilliant, thank you. Ros, we should all have Rumspringa, is my idea. Just bring it, we'll take it from the Amish and have a really fun couple of weeks, whatever they do. Anyway, because that sun thing sounds wow. Ros?
Yeah, beautiful. I love what you said there, Isla, and I feel very much the same way. And I think just the only thing I would add, I think the need for community infrastructure around rites of passage and ceremony is a desperate emergency need for us as human beings. And I think many of us feel it in our bodies. We need living in with some sense of that connection to the rhythms and the cycles of nature, and the joy that it can bring when you're sitting around a fire with other people, and the incredible transformative effect it can have on young people's lives when they are initiated into adulthood. All the initiations that we're missing, initiation into later life, just all of these things, we hunger and thirst for them. And I think that, but then it's like, well, then how do we do it? And I think there are so many amazing practitioners that do this kind of work, and probably loads of people in this room are really skilled at this kind of work. And the barrier is funding, is money. It's like those people need to be paid, and how can we Our culture doesn't value these things yet enough, or like at least the structures that allocate funds, like the government, don't necessarily allocate funds to things like this yet. Maybe a bit, but not in the kind of scale that we would need. So one thing I'm hoping for is that there is a lot of money in psychedelics, and there is this kind of sense of it having this potential to be really transformative. There's a kind of buzz around it. And there are a lot of companies that are making synthetic psychedelics, hoping for them to be kind of like pharma companies and hoping to make big profits. So what I'm hoping for is that we can call upon those companies that stand to profit from psychedelic therapy, psychedelic provision, to contribute to the creation of an ecosystem that is ready to house people after psychedelic therapy, because it's not going to work otherwise if companies are kind of, if psychedelics are being kind of like, all the pellets are flying out over the nation and everyone's like, and actually when psychedelic therapy becomes mainstreamed, people will start growing their own psychedelics, growing their own mushrooms more, because it will become more of an obvious thing to do for therapeutic purposes. So when we see this kind of, we're already seeing this huge explosion of psychedelic use, but when it really grows, we're going to need these kind of community infrastructure systems for support, for ritual, for elderhood, eldership mentoring. And so I think if we can frame it that way, to kind of say, we need to create this in our societies in order to make psychedelic therapy safe, you have a responsibility to help us provide the container. It's the cultural container, because we're cut off from our lineage. Many of us don't have a kind of plant medicine using lineage. We're cut off from that. So we need to create it again. We need to invent a new, based on many of the old ways, but we need to create this new container. So if we can then get the key stakeholders that stand to profit to create that, then I think what that will do, I hope, is two things. Firstly, safeguard a psychedelic revolution, because there will be the holding and the containment afterwards in that really vulnerable time for people in the months afterwards, when people can have so much kind of turbulence and up and down and just need that support from elders, from each other. But it will also provide it for the community, for everyone, not just for people taking psychedelics. That's like almost like the Trojan horse in. It's like psychedelics become the Trojan horse in. It's kind of paradoxical. But then what we might see is that as our communities start to have more of this richness and connection and rites of passage and ceremony and sitting together around a fire rather than all watching Netflix in our individual boxes, then we might find that there's less need for psychedelic therapy anyway, because then we might think, well, we don't, actually we'd rather just sit together and sing to the trees, and the young people might just find so much meaning and purpose in that actually they say, ayahuasca? No, thank you. That sounds really intense. I don't need it, So I think we need to start thinking of how to create that sense of responsibility from for-profit companies to say, if you're going to do this work, you need to help us build the community container.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Sam, anything to add to that? Or shall I go to the next question?
Well, no, yeah, very quickly, I think these ladies have definitely covered it and done a better job than I could hope to do. But yeah, I think it's a valid and important thing to sort of think about other ways of kind of, I guess, facilitating initiatory experiences. I know that, Professor Roland Griffiths, who's at Johns Hopkins, and who played quite a pivotal role in reigniting the modern psychedelic revival. And he has terminal stage 4 cancer now and doesn't have long left. And it's interesting hearing him open up a bit as he kind of approaches the end of his life. And his view, and obviously he entered the psychedelic game as being cynical and skeptical. He certainly wasn't an evangelist and kind of looked on with suspicion people that were, and he kind of had a reputation as being a methodical database guy. And and he went into his research skeptical that something like psilocybin could provide a reliable hotline to deep mystical spiritual states, the kind that he'd experienced through his own personal meditation practice. He was skeptical that a drug could do that. And then he did his study with spiritually interested and active people, and 2/3 of those people rated their psilocybin experience as one of the 5 most spiritually profound events of their lives. A third said it was like the most significant event. And this wasn't a trivial thing. This is on like the equivalent level to the birth or death of a loved one. But on reflecting on the values and potential risks of psychedelics, his view is that for kind of cultivating something like the mystical experience or the mystical state that the psychedelics can provide hotlines to, that they themselves are too powerful and potentially culturally disruptive to be a standalone thing to depend on. And he advocates, like, you know, let's figure out other pathways there that are potentially less destabilizing.
But the nuclear option in war, it's like, you could do that, but it has implications.
Well, yeah, I guess a psychic sense, yeah.
Okay, next question. Who have we got with the mic? Hello, sir. Who are you?
Hi, my name's Jed.
Hello, Jed.
Really grateful to everyone up there for their nuance and really grasping the complexity of some of these issues. So I just want to start with a thank you. I'm interested in myth, and it keeps me alive in many different ways. And there's been some mention of what Alex Evans, the author, calls the myth gap, which is just evidence not being enough and good argument not being enough. And I don't know about anyone else here, but I feel a longing for a new myth to be born, to allow some of these transformations that people are talking about to take place. And there's been a mention of the Great Turning, perhaps, and Gaia as well as another potential for this. But me personally, I'm not convinced yet that those have the mythic purchase that we need to really transform culture in the way that it does need changing. And I think there's the secondary bit of that, which is how do we reach normal folk with that myth? How does that really get into conservative communities or really deprived communities? How do we find stories that can really land there? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Jed, just one thing. What is the myth currently that you think that a new myth we need to replace? What is the current overriding myth in general terms, do you think?
You see, I think there's a real debate about that, because Sam talked about, you know, the big 3 or 4. You know, we've got materialism, we've got individualism, right. And I am personally very interested in political myths and how they work. How do political myths actually perpetuate themselves? And I'm trying to get more educated about that. But there's that dichotomy. Political myths can only actually serve a certain part of our psyche, and so there's a real internal debate. I don't know if those are myths. Actually, I don't know if they do have mythic purchase in the way that some parts of our civilization have depended on. So we're in this really weird. I think, you know, postmodernity is actually also a massive factor in that. And, you know, there have been deep changes, structural changes in the culture, which they're not easy to summarize. So I'm not going to try here. But
yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Jed. Okay, we need a new myth, a new story to pull us along, to look towards, and what might that be? Where could we get that? What are some of the ways that we might think about constructing that?
I can go. My first word is water, and listening to the waters, which might sound odd, but there's something of really listening to the flow, the rhythm, the pulse, that comes back to the source where all the other myths and narratives and stories that we've been perpetuating come undone. And there's some realignment, some harmonizing that happens when we're able to be present with water. I believe that within water there is also the ability to carry memory. So those prayers, songs, stories that our ancestors spoke to and shared with the waters are within that memory. And there's something of being able to see also the sort of regenerative qualities, the cleansing qualities of water that are also washing away the sort of the old. And there's something of that possibility of new life that comes forth from water. You know, we are born from the womb, surrounded by water. So something of being willing and receptive to listening to the stories, the myths that are actually already within the natural world feels really vital for me. I think because also our way of seeing has become so limited that we can't yet imagine how we're going to change these systems in the way that I know a lot of us long for. So, I mean, certainly, like, really bringing online the superpower of our imagination, this muscle needs to be used more, that we can really start to bring back the magic, to re-enchant the world in the everyday. And I would suggest that by going out and spending time listening to the natural world, that you actually are there in relationship, also sharing your story and recognizing that your tale of your life is valuable, that you carry a unique story and that there's something that you're bringing to this life. And I feel that they really love hearing it, and that there's something of that kind of conversation that happens where inspiration sparks, and then you might get a new idea and a new image comes to mind, or a new archetype, or some kind of thread of coincidence that you then feel to follow a new trajectory. But I do feel that there's something of that water also bringing and bridging, where it feels like there's so many disparate myths in a way that we can actually bind together a collective story that really feels, So, yeah, the waters, I think, hold the key for me.
It's interesting to note that clean water has certainly driven a further appreciation or respect for what we took for granted. I'm talking about sewage in our water. Things that we took for granted, clean air, clean water, now certainly the water thing has driven some political, it's rotated something in terms of climate appreciation or understanding actually nature is something that we need to respect by kind of hardcore old myth believers, if you use your traditional kind of conservative voters, to say, oh, actually, no, there's a climate thing that might change the way I vote. That's a brilliant answer in lots of ways. Thanks for that question, Jed. If okay, we might try and get as many questions as we can before we have to stop, if that's all right. Yeah? Who do we have?
Hello.
Justine.
Hello.
Hello, Justine. Where are you?
I'm here.
Hello, Justine.
Actually, Isla, I think you may have just preempted my question, but I'd like to ask it to everyone on the panel anyway. So, thank you for the conversation. It feels like the most important conversation we need to be having right now. And in thinking about the web of life and feeling into that, I'm reminded of a way of working, Council of All Beings, where we invite in the voices of the other than human. And this is a fantastic array of humans here on the panel and in the theatre, but if each of the panellists were to invite a member, representative from somewhere in the other than human, who or what would you invite in, and what might they say?
What a great question. Thank you, Justine. A lovely question. Who would like to go first? Brilliant. It's brilliant.
It's tree. Obviously a tree.
Definitely be a tree. Specific tree. Which tree?
Go for a different one.
And what would they say as well, right? What would they tell you?
I think, okay, I might just quickly jump in. If I was going for something that is like in the physical, I'd go for probably a beaver, because they are powerful totems of change and life enrichment. Like us, they engineer the environment to suit their whims, but unlike us, it tends to benefit many other forms of life. And in very quick time, working tirelessly, doing what they do, they can restore ecosystems, and they can do it in a way that we simply can't. And their kind of return, yes, it's going to cause a bit of issues. Yes, we're going to need to manage them. Like Froom's a good case in point, actually, because they are wild. They are sort of wild, having been beaver bombed onto the River Froom, and they are spreading.
That was quite recently, wasn't it?
Yes, I think so, in the last few years. But that, to me, I know it's going to piss some people off, but it gives me a sense of deep hope.
Beaver bombed.
Well, not necessarily advocating the beaver
Sort of
bombing.
guerrilla beavering, like literally
Yeah.
smuggled in at night and then off they go.
That approach really pisses off wealthy the landowning elite, if you will. They like the life on their land. They like to be either livestock or game, principally. Not all of them. Some of them are true visionaries. I don't want to generalize. Some of them are not so ecologically literate, I would say. And yeah, we're going on a bit of a tangent now, but beaver bombing has done a lot without beaver bombing, without people just releasing beavers, without asking the government's permission, we wouldn't have beavers as protected species, both here and in Scotland. We wouldn't have expanding populations of wild beavers. They'd all just be behind fences. And that even pisses off members of the conservation and ecology community, let alone wealthy landowners and government officials. So yeah, beavers as totems of positive change, and that we can turn the ship around if we ally with nature.
What would that be what the beaver would say to you? 'Cause that was
yes, but that was a message, wasn't there?
that was the message. What is the beaver saying?
Well, I don't know. It's a bit of a cop out, but he wouldn't say anything. He'd just get on with it.
Because that's what beavers do.
I know it's a bit sidestepping the thing.
Beavers haven't got time for that. They're beavering away. A perfect answer. Exactly right. Exactly. He's the ecologist as well. I'm not arguing with him.
I was going to say as well, Pan, the god of nature, if we're going for something non-physical.
Yes. He's a cheeky one.
I wouldn't really want to put words in his or her mouth though. So I'll just leave it there.
Too much respect. Perfect answer as well. Thank you. That was a brilliant. Thank you, Sam. Isla, Ros, what would the guest be, and what might they say to you?
So I'm going to choose the Douglas fir tree, which is not native to these lands, but grows in Canada, Northwest America. It's a beautiful tree, and I think what she would say is something along the lines of, have you learnt from me that the law of the forest is cooperation, not competition? Because in the Douglas fir forests in North America and Canada, the Douglas fir tree is a very lucrative tree because it grows very, very tall and straight, huge, incredible giants. And because they are so straight, they're very valuable for timber to make houses with and stuff. And so because they're such a lucrative cash crop in Northwest America and Canada, they became kind of factory farmed. So the Douglas fir trees, it was decided that this one type of tree was the most important one. They were kind of the elite trees. And all of the other trees and everything else in the ecosystem was sprayed. Helicopters flew above and they sprayed pesticides to kill everything else apart from the Douglas fir tree. And it's in a system where you get this one thing that is prioritized above all others, like humans, for example, and that you see the system break down. But what the Douglas fir tree taught was that she was connected underground by mycelium to all the other trees that were there. So the foresters sprayed all the competition. They saw them as competition because they thought that the trees were competing for light, and that for the Douglas fir trees to grow tallest and biggest, they needed to nuke the competition, spray it all. And what they learned, what the Douglas fir tree taught, was that she worked with cooperation instead, and that she needed the ecosystem to grow. So when all of her neighbours were killed, she also suffered and didn't thrive. So the foresters learned, and a lot of this was from the amazing work of Suzanne Simard in the beautiful book called Finding the Mother Tree. She understood how these mother trees, these amazing old Douglas firs, were connected to all the other beings, all the other plant life, through this system of synapses and nodes, and this intelligent community underground where the trees shared resources with each other, shared information about threats and predators, and worked in this beautiful synchrony and cooperation. So I think the Douglas fir tree would be a great guest to have because she's done it, she's lived through it, and she's just very good.
I'm going to have to bring forth the yew tree, also known as Iho. And I feel like their message, remember your roots.
Beautiful. What a great question. There's some 3 lovely answers. Thank you, Justine. Who else has got the mic? Who am I looking for? Someone up there with the mic?
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
What's your name?
Julio.
Julio?
Julio.
Julio.
Yeah.
Lovely to meet you.
Evening. Evening, Sam and Ros, and thank you, Isla, for that beautiful ceremony. I've kind of, as you both know, I've followed the psychedelic field as it's kind of become just exploded, and you just have to go on social media and see the corporations that are involved at the moment and trying to funnel as much money into it and seek ways to kind of extract as much value and money and profit. We talked about this disconnection. I mean, capitalism and corporate capitalism relies on that disconnection, and there's, I guess, the dominant view of science over the past 400 years is to gradually and almost completely eradicate any kind of sense of a union with nature in any kind of spiritual sense. So I kind of want to ask Sam and Ros kind of publicly that, you know, how do you as scientists and respected scientists in the field meet with that kind of complete, because I've faced it in academic spaces, I've faced it in journalistic spaces, an absolute, this is the falsifiable, verifiable science, that's it, it doesn't exist, and therefore with that, you know, kind of disconnection, this rampant destructive profit, and I'm just really concerned that that's happening with psychedelics as well, and I just wonder how you encounter that in your professional spaces, and perhaps even Isla, how you encounter it in the everyday world and maybe with family, or I don't know, those who have that view that this is the dominant view, the myth of separation we talked about earlier, or the modern myth is that of we are separate from nature observing it. And I don't see that disappearing anytime soon unless something monumental happens, which it may do. So, yeah, just your thoughts of how you deal with that in your everyday professional.
Yeah, I might just, kick things off and say, yeah, I do to a large extent agree in how science and science can be can sort of like augment disconnect, and I think we have to look at the roots of the scientific method. Partly arose actually out of Christian theology. A guy called René Descartes and his concept of dualism was one of the founding pillars, and he was kind of extrapolating off theology and the Bible, which clearly lays out in the book of Genesis that human beings are God's chosen children. We are made in God's image, and nature is something God made for us to sort of be used. But we are made in God's image. We are apart from nature rather than a part of it. He had 3 powerful dreams, and the third experience was a powerful lucid dream. And he was in this dream, and he was fully convinced that it was real. And he was reading a book in this dream, and then he had this sudden awakening to lucidity in the dream. That, oh my God, I'm dreaming. Like, as immaculate as real as this seems, it's an illusion. And then he was like, well, if that's true, we can't really go on what our senses alone are telling us, because they can trick you. And that was one of the early founding insights that laid the foundations for the modern scientific method, as a way of sidestepping potential issues of you falling into a kind of bubble of illusion of your own making. You need to have a bit of a detached perspective, and then sort of you can play around with factors there and sort of view them from a detached standpoint, and that's maybe a more objective way of kind of interrogating reality and how it works and nature and the universe. Unfortunately, because it had its roots in theology, it kind of had some baggage. And the dualistic view, again, elevated humans and, again, separated them from nature. So humans are the only beings possessing consciousness or spirit, and all other forms of life are automata. They react to things, but there's no true sentience or spirit in there. And this very much aligned to industrialization, colonialization, and basically dominion over nature, bending it to how we see fit and treating other beings how we damn well see fit, because even if they react like they're suffering, there's no true glimmer of sentience there. So that sort of, that was sort of obviously had a lot of, I would say, negative baggage attached to it. And I think even now, there's all this work going on recognizing sentience in non-human species, and I think still today humans are biased towards how we view sentience and consciousness in other beings because of the hangover or the shadow of this dualistic thinking. But the good thing about science, even if it was a product of its cultural environment at the time, science is pure. The humans doing it have potentially agendas and biases, but if you do science properly, it's moving towards the most accurate model of reality that you can get to, even if it might be tainted by sort of the biases of some of the people doing it. With successive progress, I think it can sort of become ever purer. And I think the science of nature connectedness is actually quite interesting here, because what's quite interesting is that scientific research on nature connectedness has revealed that scientific knowledge or understanding of nature is not a pathway to a deeper connection with nature. So personally, I feel I think science is a pure endeavor. I'm not ready to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater yet, and I think it will evolve. And I think, just at this particular point in time, we have this particular view of the world, whereas, like across cultures, across time, we've had this animist view of like seeing life and consciousness imbued throughout the living world and even the non-living world as we would consider it. And we just happen to be at this particular junction now where we have this materialistic reductionist view of nature. Well, some of us do. Some more scientifically, westernized, leaning people. But that's only the current view, and I don't think it necessarily is in any way fixed. And I think science could, in fact, play a role in pushing that aside in the future.
There's some hope. Thanks, Sam. One thing actually about that point about, the more you study nature doesn't necessarily mean that you're more, open to empathising with nature. There's also a stat here, actually from Miles Richardson's recent blog post. Outdoor adventure of the type actually really popularised by people like John Muir and being out and hiking is often assumed to improve people's bond with the nature, but actually has been found not to. So again, this kind of I use nature to get what I want out of it. Still, the fact you're hiking around in the woods doesn't mean that you feel any deeper affinity with them, which is really fascinating. The other doctor with us, how do you manage this tension between the science and the nature of the type we've been discussing within you internally?
So much to say. Such an important question. So, I think I'm just trying to think how I can kind of summarize it. Difficult to summarize. If science represents something that is about the head, then I think we need ways to tell stories that are more about the heart, which we have through personal stories, testimonials, art, song. And I feel like we those things haven't been valued as much. But storytelling, you know, the gentleman that asked about myth, we need to generate stories. We need to tell our stories in powerful ways and combine our stories together and come up with these kind of stories of our time. And I don't think science tells those, or it tells one part of those, of the story, but it is often corrupted. You know, corporate interests do divert. I would say that in terms of the purity of science, I would say, not in my experience, you know, I haven't witnessed it to be something that is completely objective. You know, there are so many forces at play, and I think that if we see it as something that's objective, then that's almost the problem, because we really fetishize it. We really, really give so much credence to brain scans, when actually sometimes they don't really say that. Well, you might not, but you know, it's like if you can tell a story and you can stick a brain scan on it, then it seems to get more kind of, it has more credibility. But I think, yeah, how to empower the telling of our stories in a way that people see those stories as important as what a brain scan might say. And I think, for me, I just feel something around the power of the people coming together. I feel like we need kind of big gatherings, that we've kind of lost that sense of big gatherings, and we've been thinking a bit about individualism and connectedness. That's the whole thing about today, connectedness. And sorry, this is a bit of a tangent, but if anyone's seen the amazing documentary Century of the Self, it's a fantastic, very long documentary, very much worth watching. It's a real education.
Adam Curtis jobby?
Yeah. And in it, he describes how the individualism and consumer individualism was kind of invented as an antidote to what was seen as the dangerous power of the crowd. It was after the Holocaust, and this was Sigmund Freud's son and nephew was kind of invented consumer culture, individualistic consumer culture, to mollify people, to settle us, so that what was seen as these kind of dangerous drives and this kind of very dangerous groupthink that had been seen in the Second World War with the Nazis, it was like, how can we make sure that never happens again? But humans are dangerous, we must keep them separate, and we must give them washing machines and televisions, and then we won't have something like the Second World War again. So there has been this distrust of big gatherings, that we need something with real power, because if science has become, in a way, one of those kind of powerful discourses, powerful narratives, powerful stories that we, in a way, kind of, it sways the way it sways evolution in a way. It's kind of the ideas that come from scientists are given this like status and importance. If we can somehow reclaim the idea of coming together en masse, and I don't even know what it would be like, but it would be to tell the real stories in some ways, and to come together for sharing, and come together to give power to narratives that are about lived experience, which bear very little relation often to journal articles, you know. So how can we empower narrative story embodied with music and dance and joy that becomes so much more potent and real and powerful, that, you know, science is also important, but it's not given this huge, potent importance, which I think is somehow linked to this drive for individualism, consumerism, and elitism and hierarchical control. So going from being the triangle to the circle in some way.
If I can just say, just quickly, in science's defense, it was the scientific method, qualitative method, that did highlight connectedness, and the central importance of that in your own work led to the creation of your connectedness scale, and has disseminated connectedness more.
Yes, and that was qualitative research, which was about stories. So that research was all about the power of stories, and it's interesting that then the measure was created because there was this sense that the power of story is great, but it's not taken seriously enough, and that you need to stick a number on it for people to take it seriously. So we did that because we had to kind of, you know, do that too. But it was hearing people's stories, sitting with them, and them saying, this is what I went through, that for me was so much more important than saying, you know, fill in a questionnaire. So at the moment, quantitative research is given a lot more credibility than qualitative, but in a way what I'm talking about with this, some kind of group empowerment. It's about the qualitative
Yeah.
stories. It's us telling our human stories together.
Yeah, well, I agree. You know, I'm on the same page as you. I think the qualitative approach is very important in all this. So I certainly wouldn't, look down on it or diminish it.
Good. You can take it outside later. It does seem actually here on a very small scale, before we get your thoughts, Isla, that right here, having scientists and storytellers, rituals, ceremony together, talking about this in the round is one. I mean, I've never heard this before, this kind of triangulation before. So that's one of the ways it seems we can bring together both, as not allow science to be the disproportionately, that's the most important thing. What are your thoughts, Ros, as the...
It's just a brief one, because of the experience I just had of that was very much the left brain, right brain experience. So The Man and His Emissary, if any of you have read that fantastic book, the way that I've come to see the left brain is my interpreter and the right brain is my mystic. And the sort of the more rational scientific side and the intuitive sort of mythical side. And it was just like, how do we merge? How do we marry those two sides? How do we bring online perhaps more of the mystical, really valuing the benefits of the scientific? That's interesting to me. That I think it was just a very visceral experience of where we had that separation. Let's bring those together.
Brilliant. I do want to get one more question in. Edward Bernays was the name of that man, and one of the things he did was he popularised women smoking cigarettes as a symbol of female emancipation. So before that, women didn't smoke, but he was the propagandist who made cigarettes. So nice chap. Okay, so hello. What's your name? Bay.
Bay.
Beautiful name, Bay.
That's better.
Hello.
Thank you so much.
What's your question?
First of all, thank you very much. This is amazingly nourishing talk, and I'm so for everything you're saying. So at the moment, this year I've been studying as a microdose coach in the Netherlands, and I've begun to see like these sort of microdose cycles in psychedelics as like a very elongated kind of ceremony and ritual. And I'm just really interested because there's such a big thing out there about the peak experience and the, it's really hit the press. But I'd really like to hear any of your wisdom or words on these more sub-perceptual kind of mini micro experiences, or how you see them fitting into the web of life. Thank you.
Babe, did you say you're a microdosing guide?
Coach. No, I'm studying. I'm nearly finished my year. Microdosing coach at the Microdosing Institute in Holland.
Fascinating. Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that good question. Yeah, microdosing. What's your view on that and not making it, rather than the peak experience, something that's just more, we wallow in more constantly?
I would be really interested in asking you that question back. Would you mind sharing a bit of your own perspective?
Yeah, I think for me, what's really interesting in these sort of sub-perceptual things, these teeny-weeny little, and learning how to help people almost go down rather than go up, because generally people have this kind of idea, if they're not feeling great, that they take more. And so I guess as a coach, part of our job is to sort of help people go smaller, sort of understand what less is more. And I think for me, I don't do them all the time, there's big gaps, but they become like a really elongated ceremony with an intention and when I started, I just tried it as an experience because I was in Holland, like, I've heard of microdosing, it's big in COVID or whatever. And then they just became like these deeply kind of spiritual experiences, like a peak experience, but stretched out. And without the kind of, what do you call it, like risks maybe, or, not quite tipping you over the edge, and also the usefulness in daily life of like having the dose as like part of a daily ritual and meditation. And so, is that helpful? Yeah.
I like the way you described it with stretching the ceremony almost, like, can you have a ceremony that lasts, this is days, weeks, so you're in it for not just an hour, a day, or 3 days, or 4 days, maybe for a week, months, your whole life? I don't know. Can life be a whole ceremony?
Hey, life is the ceremony.
Right. So life's the macro ceremony we're all in, and actually there are little ones, micro ones, all the way through. No pun intended. Okay, interesting. Okay.
Thank you for sharing that, Bay, because I find it very interesting to also think about that seeking of the peak, more intense experiences. It's like when you're running a marathon, like you push yourself to that level, but then you often suffer some injuries, and it's not maybe that well integrated, and that it doesn't become a sort of practice ongoing. It's just sort of training for the marathon, and you're done. Whereas what microdosing enables is a more consistent meeting with this spirit of this medicine, an ongoing conversation with them, and also sort of training that muscle in a more sustainable way of how to, for instance, like really bring the sacred into the mundane of the everyday, how to re-enchant those moments when we're relating with the natural world. That it seems to sort of clear the lens somewhat of just how we perceive reality, but as you say, in a more subtle way that I think is a lot more readily able to be integrated longer term. So I think that there's a lot of useful ways that microdosing could be supportive for people, particularly with mental health and depression. That's certainly been my experience.
Yeah, just coming from some of my own research experience. So I'm interested in how psychedelic experiences can affect people's relationships with nature, their connectedness to the natural world. And I'm sure that, microdosing could play a role there, but I'm just sort of, with considering some of the work that I've done so far, and thinking about things people are bringing back, insights people are bringing back to the cold, sober light of day, and at least for eliciting sustained shifts in people's relationships with nature, it seems that it's the deeper experiences people have, experiences of deep interconnection and unity, the mystical experiences as well, but some of those experiential aspects are kind of slightly deeper water, and it's like the echo of that experience kind of can leave an indelible mark on people and how they relate to the external world. And I don't know, maybe microdosing successively over time could perhaps get you to the same place, but I don't know if it could or can. And it might be those deeper, more expansive experiences are important when you're thinking about long-term changes in people's relationships with nature.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
I've changed my opinion on this actually over the last few years, because probably 5 years ago I would have thought that that for me then it felt like bigger doses where you go more into your own pain and confront traumatic experiences felt more important, because we live in a culture that teaches us to numb and distract from our pain and normalizes that, and there aren't very many ways that we're supported to go deep into our pain and see it as a teacher. And because antidepressants are the kind of main prescribed treatment for depression, and they're really helpful for some people, but lots of people, they're kind of just maybe numb they make the peaks and the troughs both a bit smaller. So I think then I would have thought that if psychedelics come in as kind of if microdosing becomes like the popular way, not that it would have to be the only way, but if it kind of takes over as the way that people do it, are we just avoiding the more painful experiences? Is it a bit, is it kind of going to become like an antidepressant? People use it just to feel a bit better. So then just anything that's that helps us to kind of avoid our pain. I just think we've had so much of that, we don't need any more of that. However, I think now I have changed the way I feel about this, because seeing the way the psychedelic field is developing and seeing the kind of the slightly macho culture around big doses sometimes, and the expectation that a big dose will reset your brain and make you a different person with one session, with just one. So the short-termism, the kind of bravado of like, yeah, hero doses, you know, I mean, sometimes they can be really helpful for people, but they can also be really traumatic and, yeah, have a long legacy. So, and also I think, yeah, there's something around the disruptive nature too of going fast, going high, you know, that kind of whole attitude of going big, you know. And so there's something now about the microdosing, this longer, gentler way of doing it. It's a bit softer. You can be a bit more gradual. You can go a bit more with the rhythms of nature, you know, just gently, somebody building up, developing trust, seeing how their own body interacts with it. So I think for me, what I love the idea of most is this kind of a combination where rather than just microdosing or going for the big one dose, that actually we all respond differently to different things, and that healing is a lifelong journey and a lifelong path. So why not start very small and take all the pressure off and all the expectation that this is going to be a life-changing experience in one day. Start small, have lots of integration, do some meditation and breath work in between, have a holistic approach, start small, and maybe build up, so that if you want to have those experiences where you do see if there's, you know, something in the basement that needs to be met and befriended, then you can kind of build up to that too. But I think, yeah, the slow, gentle approach, I've actually, developed a real fondness for that. So I think we need a lot of that too.
Thank you for that question, Babe. How brilliant. We've come to the end of this section. It must, this piece, if not only just for my bladder, but we have our stones, don't we? Isla.
So you're going to have your stone on your right hand, palm out, and then your left palm on the person's stone on your right, so left palm down. We're going to sing a call and response song, so it's nice and easy. And as we do, I really invite you to bring your breath, to bring your voice, to share this space with one another before we part ways, so that you can take this thread of connection that we've cultivated in some way by being together and enabling it to ripple out into your life, into your community.
May my song feed the earth. I believe I belong.
And allowing this seed, this stone, to grow in your life in the right way, to nurture it well, and to go from here remembering that you do belong, and that we are all ultimately a vessel of love. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Isla.
I belong.